Let's start. Hey, everyone, and welcome to We Should Talk About This, the show where we dive into unfiltered conversations about business, work, and life. I'm your host, Amy Setton, and I'm here with my brilliant co-host, Nilofer Rao.
Ta-da! Hi, everyone. We started this podcast because honestly, these are the conversations we were already having late at night, over coffee, voice notes, and texts about everything from navigating careers to figuring out how to actually live a smarter, better life while realizing that the issues that we were all facing are the same across the world, whether you live in India, UAE, or the US. So grab your coffee, your wine, your spreadsheet, whatever you need, and let's get into it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of We Should Talk About This.
Today's episode is a personal one for us and a conversation we've had over brunch, cocktails, and countless voice notes over the past few weeks. We're talking about why some women change their last names after marriage and why some of us don't. FYI, we both did not change our names post-marriage.
Yeah, it's another thing we're on the same page about. So it's one of those things that seems small until you really sit with it. For some people, it's just what you do. You get the dress, the cake, and the new name. But for us, it felt more complicated. It felt emotional and symbolic. And so not changing our names wasn't a rebellious act. It was thoughtful. Our names felt like part of our identity, tied to our families, our work, and our roots.
And we're not here to convince anyone to do it our way. We're just opening up the conversation because this topic, it's very thought-provoking and many people have feelings about it. We've talked to countless friends, male and females, scrolled social media, and read articles. And basis our research, I can tell you that it is wild how many people have different says on both sides of the topic.
I know. It's been a very fun topic to talk to with friends and family. And it's interesting to hear everyone's thoughts, whether they've thought about it or they have not thought about it. But where should we start? What do you think?
Well, let's zoom out for a second. And over the weekend, and after talking to you about all of these things, we both really started wondering why name changing became the norm in the first place. And when we really thought about it and asked our moms and our grandmoms, we realized that it wasn't something that was cute or romantic. It wasn't because of love. It came out of ownership. At least in the Indian culture, a woman went from being her father's responsibility to her husband's responsibility, or even his family's responsibility. And when we're talking about responsibility, we are referring to the financial responsibility. So like property, women were basically just passed along. And that's how the whole last name change came into effect. In fact, in many cultures, that's still the case. I was so curious to know how many women in India changed their last name post-marriage. And the number is astounding. It's 92%. And a lot of them is not necessarily by choice. What is really interesting is a friend of mine who changed her last name defined it as an expectation from the partner and his family, with her feeling that changing her name will make that transition to their family a lot more smoother. And she will be looked at as adopting their traditions. And it's not just that, it's also the fact that in India, there's still a huge population of couples that still live with the guys or their husband's parents. You're basically living with your in-laws. And it's just weird to say, hey, I'm living in your house. I'm not paying any rent. I'm not paying for groceries. And I don't want your name. It's interesting how it all came about. And what really makes me wonder is, even in this day and age, why is it always women who expected to enter the men's family? Why is it not the other way around? Why don't we ever hear about men talking about changing their names, or even your in-laws talking about it? And that is what really irks me, the double standards.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's so interesting that it's still expected for the woman to change their name. And it's interesting that stat you mentioned in India that it's still so high. And it's probably rooted in that history you mentioned. It's also pretty high in the United States. I think it's about 77% of women change their name post marriage. And I know that this is still very much tied to history, to tradition, a little bit tied to religion as well. And I'm not sure if people are questioning it or if it's just default that it's something you do. My mom, she got married in the 80s and she originally kept her name for 10 years because she felt very connected to it. But eventually she did change it. And I'm not sure if it was pressure or she felt like she built a new family. I do know that there was tension and she did feel very connected to her family name and felt like there was a loss by giving that up.
That's so interesting about your mom and like that whole aspect of looking at you and asking you that question. It's almost like when you go out for a date and the server just brings the check automatically to the meal sitting on
Yeah.
the table. It's almost like there are so many preconceived notions and expectations in the society. And when we really look at it, changing your last name is really one of them. So, similar to your mom, one of my aunts never changed her name. When I asked her why over the past few days, she said when she was in her 20s, she was a very strong feminist. And thankfully, my uncle never really cared or expected her to change her last name. However, now almost after 25 years of marriage, she says that her logic and reasoning has changed. The reason why she didn't want to change her name when she was young was because she wanted to preserve that legacy and take her dad's name forward.
Mm.
But today she's only the royalty or maybe your employers remember you after two generations. No one in the family remembers who their great 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 grandmother was and what was her last name. And she also told me that she's mellowed down with age. And so today she doesn't mind it either way with regards to changing her name. So I really wonder if age isn't just a number and it changes your perspective on things.
Yeah, I think that depending on when you get married or even a different decade in your marriage and your partnership, you may feel different. I've heard from different people like that early in their 20s, women who have gotten married, they didn't feel that attached to their last name, so they changed it. And then I've also heard women who have gotten married older or like later in life, and they felt very connected to their name, so they kept it. It really does depend on the individual.
So let's talk about our own choices. Amy, why didn't you change your last name?
So, first, I just really liked my name and I never thought about changing it. And I will say that I think that's a lot of reasons why people don't change their name is that they just feel like they like it just for the aesthetic reason. But also for me, my name felt like it's on every email that I've ever sent and every piece of work that I've done, and even introductions with other people. So people know me as my name. So changing it felt like starting over. I felt very connected to my name.
I feel that too. And for me, it wasn't about loving my partner any less or not accepting his last name. It was about myself and honoring my own legacy. And I don't care if people two generations down don't remember it. That's absolutely fine with me. I think it just matters to me that my parents know that I'm honoring it. And hopefully, when we have kids, our kids know my reasoning and logic behind it and they appreciate it for that. So we're actually two daughters, and my parents' legacy or last name ends with her and me. They raised us, shaped us, supported us. They still do. every single day. In fact, my mom and my dad are basically rearing up my niece at this point. So why would I give up my name, my identity, especially when my partner doesn't have to even think about it?
Yeah, I agree. I do feel very connected to the family name through history. I feel like I want to keep it to respect my family lineage, even though obviously both our last names were passed down through the male line. I do think preserving my side is important to me. Also, I felt like a lot of people assumed that I would change it. Even now, people assume that I have changed my last name. They'll add me in their contacts with my partner's last name or address me with my partner's last name. It bugs me. I know that they're just making an assumption. Their intentions aren't to be insulting, but I'm not sure why everyone else feels like they need to decide this for me. And I think it should be more normalized to ask someone, like, did you change your name or what's your name? As opposed to just assuming that the person has changed their name.
Yeah, 100% been there, especially when it's wedding invitations. But I do appreciate that two people whose wedding we were invited to did reach out to me and ask me before they put it on the invite. So I really appreciated that. Our first commonality is basically within women who are either single female child or only female child or only daughters. So what was really interesting was that I spoke to a few Arab friends, none of whom have changed their last name, across different countries in the Middle East. And they all mentioned that in Arab community in the past, the woman would take the husband's family name because you are the husband's responsibility after marriage. We talked about it. It's all around the financial burden, independence, all of those heavy words. But modern day view has changed, or at least like the modern day view of people that are around me has changed in the sense they truly believe that the maiden last name is who they are, the family that they actually come from, and their way of honoring that family. So the big question is, why would I switch? And this is coming from majority of my friends who are basically two daughters and they know that their family's lineage will stop there because their kids will automatically take their partner's last name.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think that preserving one's legacy is a common theme that we found among many women we've spoken to. We both had conversations with our partners, and we were lucky to have very open conversations that it was easy to communicate, at least with my partner, that I didn't want to change my name. And he was very understanding, listened to my reasoning, and respected my decision. I don't know if that is the case for everyone. I know that this could be a more difficult conversation. What happened with you?
Yeah, with Sabir, I was under the impression that we never really discussed it. But then I was talking to him this week and he was like, nope, we definitely discussed it. And you closed that topic within 2 minutes. So clearly he honored my decision to keep my last name. But that also comes from the fact that his sisters kept their own maiden last name even after marriage. So it's hard to have that double standard when it comes to women in your family versus your partner. But also, I'll be very real, the legal hassle of changing your name across a dozen documents in two different countries, that was no, thank you. I'm just happy to keep my name and I'll continue my life with the documents that I have. Don't want to change them.
Yeah, totally. It feels like such a pain to change your last name and change all your documents, including like your passport, or in your profession, you have to change a lot of things. I know that I spoke to someone who said that they didn't change their last name because she was a doctor and she spent over a decade establishing her career. And it's really complicated at that point to change your last name because you're almost like giving up some of this brand reputation in your career for that name switch. We've heard so many different reasons, and there's not one size that fits all. I also had a friend that told me that being an only child was a key reason why she didn't change her name. She said the surname is more than just a name. It is about preserving identity and legacy of family, honoring the people who made me who I am. Carrying it forward feels like keeping that connection alive. It's such a nice thought, don't you think?
I love that thought. I feel connected to that too. It's basically honoring my family and the people who shaped me into who I am today. I was also really lucky that both my mom and my dad had the same last name, so I can basically shout from the rooftops and be as feminist about it as I want. So, what were some of the other different thoughts your friends shared that you think our listeners should hear?
So we had a lot of other opinions because we know a ton of people that did change their last name. And I was curious to why they did. So one of my friends said, it only affirms my identity. I will always be me with my original name, and adding my partner's name is a bonus, just like marrying my partner is a bonus to my life, which I feel like is a very nice thought
Yeah.
and not something that I've thought about, as changing your last name to your partner is like becoming one or taking on this concept of you are one unit together.
What I also really like in that response is it's adding on to your personality and not completely changing, or sorry, it's adding on to your name and not just completely changing your name. So I really like that way of thinking. And I also realized every person is just so different in their thought process. So when I reached out to my cousin, who's a Gen Z, she's 26 years old, I was like, oh, I'm going to hear so much of this feminist stuff that you're talking about here, which is like, no, I want to retain my identity and I want to do this and I want to do that and F patriarchy and whatever not. But it was so surprising because my female cousin told me, she said, I am more attached to my first name. And I didn't even use my last name until 12th grade. So for her, last name is literally just a logistic and how she's addressed. In her mind right now, at least, she's happy to change it as long as she has a conversation with her partner and tries to understand what his rationale, his or her rationale is behind it. On the flip side, my male cousin, who's like 24, 25, when I asked him that question, he was like, I don't care. I would love it if she retains her name. I would actually appreciate it if she retains her name and her identity. And I'm happy for her to choose whatever she wants to choose for her last name. So it's so interesting to even talk to Gen Z about it because immediately in my mind, it was like, oh, I know the answer. And they both just surprised me with their answers in good and bad ways, I guess.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And to add to the thought of why people are changing their name, along the lines of your Gen Z cousin, some people just don't feel attached at all to their last name, or they just don't like their last name. And so switching their name is exciting so that they can like it and feel good about it. It doesn't have to mean anything as profound as what we're talking about. But anyway, I'll just add that like people don't necessarily feel this connection. So switching over isn't a big deal.
Yeah, what was also really fascinating for me is that while for you and I, and for a bunch of other friends of ours, last name equates or equals legacy, but for some
Yeah.
people, it does not. And I spoke to two women who put it very differently. So one of my friends, she got married last year. She's Canadian, but Indian heritage, and her partner is French. And when I asked her, what are your thoughts about changing your name? And she told me that my partner never really asks me for anything. And before we got married, one of his asks was that he would like it if I could change my last name to his name.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And she said, and honestly, being here in this part of the world, I don't want people to know my nationality or my heritage. So having his last name on my resume gives me that anonymity that I'm looking for.
That's so interesting. I never thought of it that way. Changing your last name can also create that anonymous feel because sometimes last names do equate to religion or status or something like that.
100%. And what was even more interesting, in addition to what she'd already told me, was that she said she does not believe that her last name is her legacy. Her legacy for her would be to lead a good life, to have kids, to raise her kids well, and to really just be a good human being. And that's her legacy. So for her, it was so different. And it was a refreshing point of view. So another one that I heard, which was almost in sort of similar lines, was along to the fact where she's like, I don't think that my legacy is my last name. I have barely ever used my last name and I don't feel connected to it at all. So for me, my legacy is something that I will build on my own. And that I think was a really interesting point of view as well.
I like
So
that thought.
that is really, but one thing that I do draw in common with both of them is they both have brothers who have
Mm.
kids. So they know
Okay.
that they still have their family legacy going on. And then you can basically just be like, oh, yeah, I don't believe in it. But I do like both their thoughts as well, where one is, I both of them are pretty much, we will build our own legacy. And that could mean different things for both of them. But that was an interesting one.
Yeah, it brings like a fresh perspective to changing your last name. I will add that I did hear people who changed their last name and then kept their maiden name as their middle name. This is actually really common in the US, and I also think it's slightly tied to religion that some religions do this. I feel like that is also another way of preserving your legacy to some extent, where you like keep your name in history, but you change your last name to your husband's.
Personally, I'm not a fan. The first time I heard about middle name was when I came to the US. I did not know such a concept existed for the longest time. Although, of course, my dad has a middle name, but it does not really mean anything. And I don't think my grandparents put a lot of thought behind it. I do feel that the maiden name as middle name will get dropped eventually over time. And a lot of it comes out of convenience, right? I think one of the things that we've talked about earlier, and which is going to be a theme, is just the fact for some it's convenient to change, for some it's not convenient to change. And that's the same thing. Having a middle name could be or could not be convenient for you. And in India, middle names are not really a thing. So that solution doesn't really land as well. What do you think about having maiden name as the middle name instead?
I think that having your name be preserved in history in some way is nice. And so doing that by changing your middle name, your maiden name to your middle name is a good way to do that. And I know in my family, that was the tradition. It's actually very much tied to religion. That's how you can trace the matriarch line through time. And it has helped me in my mini project learning about my family history is that I can go back multiple generations on the matriarch line because I see the middle name.
Mm.
I will say though that I don't really know how common middle name is used today, but it is on people's birth certificates. I still use it in my identification documents. So I think that is like a nice, could be a nice way to change your name, but also preserve your family lineage.
I love what you shared about your family. I think it's so meaningful. And then that whole sort of patriarchal angle to it gets diluted a little bit. It's also like leaving breadcrumbs throughout your history so that you can just trace it back so quickly. I don't think I'll ever be able to find mine because we just don't do that.
Yeah, it's
Mm.
really nice because I agree. I think you can get stuck if you ever are looking back in your own history.
100%. We heard from quite a few people that the shift to last name comes into play more once kids come into the picture. So one friend of mine, she told me that she didn't change her name after marriage. Same thought process. I've had this name already. I love my dad. I love my family history, so on and so forth. But now that she has a child, she started feeling left out, especially when they travel. So for her, she feels like someone who's like the odd one out in her own family of three.
Yeah, I heard this quite a lot with my community. And I do think that once you have children, this becomes more complicated. I spoke to one friend who changed her last name because she felt really connected to having one family unit, or what she defined as one family unit. And she wanted to bond as a family. So switching her last name to her husband's name that would be the same as her children's made sense to her. And I think that's a really big reason why a lot of people change their last names, at least from what I can tell with my US community. But also will add, I got a lot of people mentioning the like functional or logistic component to changing their last name. So if you're going to travel with your family to feel more secure and well known that you are one family, a lot of people felt like that was important. Or if there's ever a medical emergency, it's very clear if you have the same last name that you're related. And then also like tiny details. I had a mom talk about going to school pickup. She felt more secure that like she had the same last name as her child and her husband had the same last name as her child, that there was almost this like safety or security thing that they both had the same last name. It can't be misrepresented when they go pick up their kids at school. So I think that there are a lot of different reasons why people do change their last names. And there are also a lot of reasons why people don't change their last names. And I think it just all comes back to agency. Changing your name or not should be a conscious decision, not just a cultural autopilot move.
Yeah. And it's not about judgment. We're not saying don't change your name or change your name. We're saying make it your informed call.
Exactly. I think we've heard so many different reasons why or why not. Whether you keep it, you change it, you blend it, you invent something new, have fun with it and think about why you're changing or not changing your name. Thank you for tuning in on this episode. We should talk about this. If today's episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend or even a partner.